Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be speaking with another one of my castmates, my brother Ben, played by the wonderful Eric Scott. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come talk to me and all of our loyal viewers.
Well, Judy, before we even say that, I've been watching yours and they come out twice a week. And you have done such a good job of just, first of all, taking the energy and the time to learn, relearn what we've been doing all those years and really telling people what we were doing. And it's a lot of work that you've been doing. And I'm very impressed by them. And I want to thank you because it's something that my kids will be able to look at for years to come. And it was all the stories that we were doing every week, but we never put the time to talk about them because we were just doing them.
Yeah, I wish at the time we were filming, we didn't have iPhones and stuff like that. So I very rarely had a camera on set. So I don't have really pictures and stuff of the set particularly or the people. So I just occasionally will come across something or find something or something that one of you have. And
well, it was work.
Yeah.
You even now you go to work, you don't take pictures of everything that's at work. It was our work. So just because everyone in the world wants to see what we were doing at work every day, that's not what we were doing.
Yeah.
We were just going to work. We were showing up at the time we were supposed to start the day. We got into makeup, we got into wardrobe, we went on the set and we did our job. And at the end of the day, we washed up and went home.
Yeah.
So we didn't think that people would be asking us 50 years later, that Tuesday that you were filming, what was it like working with that person? So we just didn't think of that. And we certainly didn't think of taking our little cameras that we had and take pictures. If one of us had a birthday, maybe our parents were there and they took a picture of that day, but day in, day out, we didn't have that kind of need or desire.
So. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if you got to see the segment I did where I had found some home movies that my mom shot.
Yes.
Oh, that was
amazing.
I had no idea because when my mom passed away, I ended up with all these different things that she had. And she had all these little old school reels. And I was like, what do I do with this? And I think it was your Cindy that said, had talked about you guys sending some things to be converted. But there was a lot of them and I didn't know what they were. And they charge by the minute. And I'm like, I could end up with who knows what. But that one said something about studio. And so I said, oh, well, let me print this up and see what it is. So that was so fun.
Well, those were little gems that you found. So.
And then I had to figure out how to narrate it because there was no sound on it. For the editor, I literally ran, when I had it as in a digital form, I ran it on the screen and I shot it so that I could narrate what was happening at the same time you could see what was happening. So then the editor could know what
that's a good idea.
About. So yeah. I use very very old school techniques to do a lot of things because that's all I know. I'm old school.
Well, we call it
or
primitive.
Just old. But... One of the
two. You call it old school. I call it primitive.
Yes,
whatever.
That too. Yes. Well, although some of our primitive things by today's standards, we're being able to shoot on film, on 35 millimeter film.
Yes.
Which was such a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although you never knew what you had until you saw it.
Well, that's right. But we sure saw it later on after it was edited and music was added, and what beautiful stuff we put together back then, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated now by the types of questions that people ask. And sometimes they're things that wouldn't have occurred to me. Sometimes they're things that we completely take for granted because it was just normal for us. People asking about not realizing that you shoot out of order. And so, me trying to explain why that was practical, it maybe wasn't as easy for the actors, although I think it's easier in a series because you really know your character. So I think it's easier to track the arc of your character in in an episode. I just didn't really think that much about it. And I also found on the series that I wouldn't say that our directors always trusted us to know our characters. So I wouldn't say that I felt that most directors gave us a lot of input about our characters or our motivation in scenes.
No, maybe they had an idea that they maybe didn't see all the shows that we had done, so they weren't up on maybe one that we had done. So there might be a correction that we might even tell them that, well, that isn't consistent with this episode that we did 2 weeks earlier that they didn't direct. So I think we had a better grasp of our characters than maybe even they did. I remember Harry one time wanted me to say a line a particular way. And I said, Harry, I just wouldn't say it that way. And he came back to me, no, you got to do it. You got to do it. And I said, Harry, I just can't do it. So I did it my way. And probably 4 months later, it was on the air. And he came to me the next morning and said, my wife saw it and you were right. Mm. So sometimes it worked that way. And it was just a silly little line, but I knew that my character would not have said it a certain way. Yeah. So the intonations were wrong. So yeah, we knew our characters pretty well. So it was just usually just fine tuning, but sometimes the directors would guide us in something that we maybe weren't as comfortable with, or we always did. So, they were there to help us.
Yeah. And it was nice when I always enjoyed when they gave me a perspective that I hadn't thought of yet that was a good one and added something to the performance.
But also they in a way we were younger than sometimes. My character was much younger than I was as a person, as myself. But they had Ben doing things that my life was not there yet. I was getting married before I was 20 on the show. So I had kids before I was even 21, 22 on the show. So I was experiencing things that I really couldn't relate to as well as I couldn't tap into my own personal experiences on some of these. So, it was nice to have a director on the set that could sometimes give you a little, no, that's not right. So
that's not how it goes. Yeah. Well, what's your take on Ben? How do you see him? How did you see that character evolve? I know with someone like John playing Jason, because John was so musical himself, they made that a real part of his character as Jason developed. So with you, how did all of that work for you, and how did you see it? And did you bring things that were really you to it? Because it was such a large cast, I feel that a lot of times they really had the adults well established, grandma and grandpa's characters, but they added that whole salt and pepper relationship between the two of them as the years progressed. And with Ralph and Michael, you saw the magic they did. With Richard, they had a clear defined. For us, they waited to really get to know us a little bit. Ben, at the very first year, I remember the first big episode I had of a subplot was the star. And I had the little spelling bee thing. And I remember going on the set, and we were in the little schoolroom, and that was like the first time it was centered around my character. And it was very sweet, and he was just one of the little boys, and it was just a very sweet little tidbit of an episode. And by the end of the year, I think it was a couple scenes I had with Michael in the Easter Story that I just loved. But they really didn't know what to do with Ben yet. And I think that they found that I was probably a little more feisty. They could have tapped into a little bit more of that energy that I had as a human being. And it makes for good drama. And I think they ran with that a lot more with Ben. They made him into a little bit more aggressive than I would have, but we just had fun with it because it was a fun character to play. Some people talk about, why would you want to play a serial killer? Because it's fun to do. And Ben, not that he was anything like that, but he was definitely, he was a pain. It's pain sometimes. He wouldn't listen. He wouldn't, he was a little bit of a, he wasn't very nice sometimes, but being the younger brother or the older brother, it was a lot of fun to do those kind of things and be
tease the siblings a little bit more than I would normally. And I didn't mind doing that. So we had fun with that. And then as Ben got older, they saw the business side of my life. And I think they got Ben into a little bit more of that. And fortunately, I saw an episode you just did about Mary Ellen being shifted off into having her own world away from Walton's Mountain. Fortunately, Ben was not going to leave the mountain. They put set the shed up as he got older and got married, and made a Walton and Son and the mill. So I had full intention that I was never going to leave the mountain, because if I was off the mountain, I'd be in less scenes. But that brings me to when Ben went to the war later on. And I loved doing that work. It was so different for me. It was interesting because it wasn't like other shows that I had done that were very. It was Ben, but in a different position.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun.
Beautiful work in the last 10 days. Just, every time I see that, I think your work in that episode, some of those things were just wonderful. So beautiful.
Oh, thank you. It was very different to do. It was hard to not think of us being in the back lot and using the jungle and using Drusilla's pond as the point of the POW camp. But
you said they drained it and used Drusilla's pond.
Yeah. They drained the pond and they just built it on the bottom of the concrete jungle that we had over there. And they just amazing how they changed things. There was always a little bamboo there they could use and stuff like that they would grow that were indigenous to the area. So it was a pretty easy fit for them. But we never looked at the plant species to figure out whether it was Virginia or if it was South Pacific or Europe.
None of the above. It was strictly Warner Brothers Burbank Studios.
That's right.
I want to thank Eric for joining me today. I will be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy, and more with Eric Scott. Thanks for watching.